We will go ahead and get started now. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our discussion, Protecting Genocide Survivors Through Refugee Resettlement. I am Naomi Steinberg, HIAS's Vice President for Policy and Advocacy, and I will be your moderator today. For those of you who are joining HIAS programming about the Rohingya refugee crisis for the first time, welcome. And for those of you who have joined our previous related conversations, welcome back. We are so appreciative that you've stayed on this journey with us. And a huge special thank you to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. HIAS has long valued our partnership with you, and we're especially honored to be co-hosting what we think will be a really important conversation with you today. I can't think of another partner we would rather be doing this with. And now, with that said, it is our aim to make this event as conversational as possible. So instead of asking our panelists today to provide presentations, what we want to do is engage in a real dialogue. So I will be asking questions and we will go back and forth that way. And there's no better group of people with whom to have this conversation. So what I want to do now is a few quick introductions before we do some quick housekeeping notes, and then we'll dive into the discussion. So we have some really wonderful panelists with us today. Anwar Kasim is the founder and president of the Burmese Rohingya Community of Wisconsin, a nonprofit that serves resettled Burmese and Rohingya refugees in Milwaukee. His experience includes working in multiple countries for the United Nations and US State Department, among other Rohingya refugee-focused organizations, NGOs, and international NGOs as well. He is a resettled refugee and arrived in Milwaukee with his family in 2015. He fled Burma about 2 decades ago, spending time first in Bangladesh and Malaysia before coming to Milwaukee. Welcome, Anwar. Kira Fox is the research associate at the Simon Skjodt Center for the Prevention of Genocide at the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, where she conducts research and policy outreach on strategies to prevent and to mitigate contemporary mass atrocities. She previously worked for the Center for Social Integrity, a civil society organization in the Rohingya refugee camps in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, and she graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So we definitely have a strong Wisconsin theme here today. And then certainly last but not least, we have Yasmin Ullah, who is a Rohingya activist. She was born in Rakhine State before fleeing to Thailand in 1995, along with her parents. She remained a stateless refugee in Thailand until 2011, at which point they migrated to Canada. She advocates and raises public awareness of the gross human rights violations against the Rohingya community. She hopes to bring attention to the socioeconomic incentives of genocide, amplify the voices of Rohingya women, highlight the intergenerational trauma that persists within the community, and mobilize the international community to actively condemn and combat the ongoing genocide. So welcome to all three of you. So with that said, a few exciting tech notes for you. Because this is a webinar, you will only be able to see and hear our panelists today. Everyone else will remain muted. There will be time allocated towards the end of the program for audience questions. To submit your questions to us, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Or if you're joining us by phone, you can email takeaction@hias.org. You can send in your questions to us at any time throughout the call, and we'll do our best to get through as many of them as possible, given the limited time that we have. All of your questions will remain anonymous, and this webinar is being recorded. We want to make sure you all know that. So as we dive in, I want to provide a little bit of context. You might be wondering, why is HIAS? Why is the Holocaust Memorial and Museum having this conversation today? Why are we discussing this? And I'm going to give you a little bit of behind the scenes scoop and some real full transparency here. We have been talking about doing this webinar for a long time. We first wanted to co-host this webinar with the museum way back in September. That feels like it was so long ago, before the Biden administration announced its refugee admissions goal, also known as the presidential determination for this fiscal year 2022. But then the fall of Kabul happened. And with the world's attention turned to the Afghan refugee response, we decided to delay this conversation about refugee resettlement and the role that it can play as one of the tools to to respond to contemporary genocide with a particular focus on the Rohingya refugee crisis. Not because this isn't deeply important. We didn't delay because we didn't think this was urgent, but we wanted to have the space for all of us to be able to expand our focus again. And it is essential that we are able to do that because as a global community and as a country, we have to be able to proverbially walk and chew gum at the same time, remembering that there is an urgent Rohingya refugee crisis going on, and for that matter, refugee crises around the world. And moreover, not just remembering, taking action, raising awareness, learning and reminding ourselves that from a US perspective, our refugee resettlement program is meant to help refugees who need it the most, no matter where they are from. We are not in a country that can only respond to one refugee crisis at a time or welcome one group at a time. And so this conversation is meant to remind all of us that for years, Rohingya refugees, more than 1 million people, have been languishing in camps in Bangladesh and many more throughout the region. And many of this number arrived in Bangladesh following the mass atrocities, the genocide that took place in Rakhine State, Burma in 2017, an attempt at the hands of the Burmese military and armed groups to wipe the Rohingya off of the map. At HIAS and at the museum, the ethnically and religiously motivated genocide resonated and resonates deeply with all of us because what we saw was that never again happened again. And in spite of the scope and the scale of the genocide and the subsequent refugee flow, the world has turned its attention elsewhere. But that is a huge mistake, and we are working to rectify that. Following the recent coup in Myanmar, chances for a return for Rohingya refugees went from bad to worse. Conditions in the camps are becoming increasingly dire, with a host of protection challenges abounding. And coming from a community, the American Jewish community, that would look very different were it not for the eventual welcome of many of our relatives, genocide survivors decades ago. It could be argued that we have a special responsibility to remind the world of the importance of responding to the Rohingya genocide with resettlement as one of the response options. And just one last quick note, resettlement is never meant to be the sole response to any forced displacement crisis. That's not its purpose. We are not suggesting that the US and other resettlement countries should clear the camps in Bangladesh through resettlement. What we are saying though is, and we have been for years with our partners, that resettlement has to be a part of the equation for those of whom who can truly not return and for whom staying in Bangladesh is not an option. So today we will hear directly from activists who have been through the resettlement process themselves, but can also speak directly to the need that remains for many in Bangladesh. So I'm going to kick off this conversation with Kira. And Kira, as the United States Holocaust Memorial and Museum's representative today, again, welcome. We're so glad to have you. But also, can you take a moment and tell us about the purpose and the work of the museum's Simon Skjodt Center for the Prevention of Genocide? And how does the center in the museum, how have you been bringing attention to the Rohingya refugee crisis? And what does that work look like today?
Thanks so much, Naomi, and thank you for the opportunity to partner with HIAS on this webinar. We're so grateful for the chance to spotlight this really critical issue. So for those of you who don't know, the museum has a center known as the Simon Skjodt Center for the Prevention of Genocide. And this center seeks to do today for communities what was not done for Jews during the Holocaust. So what that looks like is our center focuses on countries where there is a serious risk of, or where there is ongoing, large-scale, group-targeted, identity-based persecution that rises to the level of genocide or related crimes against humanity. And that's what we've seen with the Rohingya today. So what our center does is we conduct research to better understand the risks of genocide and mass atrocities against certain groups around the world. We alert policymakers to ongoing risks, and we educate policymakers on what tools they have to prevent genocide and crimes against humanity. Our center began work on Burma nearly a decade ago. In March 2015, we issued a report on the early warning signs of genocide against the Rohingya in Burma. And following the genocidal attacks against the Rohingya in August and September of 2017, our center, in partnership with Fortify Rights, documented the atrocities against the Rohingya, and in December of 2018, we made a genocide determination. Last year, we published an exhibition called Burma's Path to Genocide, which is both in person at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and online. And that exhibition documents how the Rohingya went from citizens to outsiders to victims of genocide. Today, we continue to spotlight the risks of genocide and crimes against humanity against the Rohingya, as well as other ethnic and religious minorities in Burma. The Rohingya face an ongoing risk of genocide in Burma. For those of you who don't know, the Burmese military seized power in a coup in February 2021 and has since committed widespread alleged crimes against humanity against Burmese civilians, including ethnic and religious minorities. This military coup has not only caused widespread devastation to civilians in the country, but it has also increased the risk to Rohingya who remain in Burma, meaning that it is even less likely that those Rohingya who have fled will be able to return to their homes anytime soon. So what the museum's Simon Scott Center does, and what we see as our role, is to continue to spotlight the risks facing the Rohingya community and to identify actions that the US and others can take to address these risks, protect the Rohingya, and prevent further atrocities.
Thank you, Kira, for providing that context for us and helping people to understand what it is that we're doing here together. So Anwar, the next question is for you. I would like for you, for those of us who are on the call who might be newer to this topic, if you could set the stage for us a little bit by just giving us a brief explanation about who the Rohingya people are and we both touched on this, Kira and I, but provide a little more context about what caused more than 1 million to flee from Burma to Bangladesh and elsewhere in the region.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Kara. Thank you, HIAS, and thank you, US Holocaust Memorial, and thank you for all those watching now. The Rohingya are an ethnic and religious minority from Myanmar. Myanmar is a country located between Thailand, China, India, and Bangladesh. Myanmar lies between South Asia and Southeast Asia. Myanmar is a very diverse country, has over 100 ethnicities. The majority of the population are Buddhist, and the religious minorities like the Muslims and Christians are facing the highest level of persecutions. My people are one of the ethnic and religious minorities. We are from Rakhine State. It is very rural. It is among the poorest states in a very poor country. It's pretty undeveloped with a very few paved roads, limited infrastructure like electricity, internet, plumbing, villages combined with larger village tracts surrounding a township. There are not many large structures, and there is a lot of thick jungles. I grew up in Mongdo Township. When I think back about it, I remember a lot of bad things, but it is also my home, and I remember a lot of good things as well. I went to a school in my village on foot daily. High school is around 1 to 2 miles far away from my village. I always had to go on foot as well. When I got into college, there were so many modes of transportation that I had to take. First, I went on foot, then by car, then by boat, aeroplane, by train, and then car again. Finally, I had to take a horse-drawn carriage to reach to my college. A school wasn't attainable for most. I was very lucky. It takes money to go. There is a lot, there is not many schools. There are rising discriminations against Rohingya. It gets worse day by day. What caused so many to flee? They call it a slow burning genocide. What that means is systems and process put in place decades ago that would set the framework that ultimately led to what has been called a campaign of ethnic cleansing and genocide. Since the Burmese military took over in 1948, there began a series of changes that led the military regimes down a path towards committing grievous human rights abuses against minorities, especially the Rohingya. Kutupalong refugee camp was actually around in the 1970s after violence drove several thousand villagers out and recently become the world's largest refugee camps. The 1982 citizenship law made things a lot worse. It identified who was and wasn't a citizen. So you can imagine yourself the difficulties of being a refugee within your own country. From this point, things degraded quickly for my people. In 2000's operation, discriminations, violence reached the highest level. Our people have been subject to the most severe human rights abuses. Violence in 2011 through 2017 is what caused 1 million Rohingya to end up in Kutupalong. But the reasons behind the violence stem from decades of discriminations and malevolence aimed towards Rohingya.
Thank you. I know how hard it is to try to encapsulate that in just a few minutes. You did a beautiful job. Yasmin, this one is for you. You know, following up on Anwar's opening remarks, with all of the refugees in the sprawling refugee camps in Cox's Bazar, as he mentioned, now collectively the largest in the world, as well as a growing number on an island in the Bay of Bengal. Can you talk a little bit about what conditions are like there now for Rohingya people who have been living there for years?
It's very, very dire, as much as I can, from the outside describe it. We have basically a condition of people who have been not necessarily voluntarily gone into the island, although there have been several attempts, and I believe that there had been one visit by the UNHCR so far onto the island after people have already been transported into the island. The conditions that I'm talking about is that people are not getting enough food, enough water, and it's basically a prison, if I can just frame it that way, because there is no way out, there's no way in, no outsiders, no observers. And on top of that, it is not the humanitarian organizations that are actually operating on the ground. It's the Bangladeshi Navy. And, without going into further issues that comes with, militarization of a refugee camp, of a group of people who have not done anything wrong necessarily, but that their identity just involves people often pushing them into securitization and militarization. The entirety of this situation comes down to what Rohingya people are offered by the world, which is very little safety. And we have been displaced. We have been going through a lot of things for the past 4 years. But prior to that, there have been lots and lots of campaigns to destroy us. But this is just basically sealing the deal for us, that there is very little regards to our humanity. And that shows in the treatment that we've been receiving within the camps, and worse so in the Basanchara Island, where the conditions are just so horrifying, and people are arrested, detained for having outside contacts, because there is an attempt to actually, I think there's an attempt to cover up or to make sure that people don't actually understand what goes on inside. And I think my idea of this being a prison is somewhat accurate, without going into further details of what that involves.
Thank you for painting that picture for us, to help those of us who can't really imagine what that is like, to give us a little more detail. One of the things that you were starting to touch on is this real effort from the government of Bangladesh to make sure that people don't know what's going on in the camps. But in spite of that, of course, when you have so many people together, there are going to be leaders. There are going to be people who say, wait a second, we need to speak up for ourselves, for our community. But doing so in these camps comes at a great risk. It is my understanding, increasingly dangerous for everyone in the camps, but B, significantly increased risk for activists. For example, not that long ago, a very prominent Rohingya leader, a human rights activist, was killed and women activists are also increasingly at risk. So I was wondering if you could talk with us about why is it so dangerous for activists in the camps right now, and why that has such an impact on their future, why it's dangerous for them in Bangladesh, and what that means for the possibility of them being able to return to Burma.
There are a few things that I want to maybe allude to before we go into why it's so dangerous. I think to set up or to frame this entire scenario is that we have to go into how we have a perfect storm of these different factors that inherently causes radicalization and violence in relation to poverty. And this is something that we understand in sociology and criminology, that a population of people, especially men, who are most affected by crimes and or are involved in the crimes are usually young men who live in relative poverty or under poverty. And this is, a vast camps with precarious conditions where people not only have been forced to get out of their own homes to leave things that made life worth living, even under conditions of apartheid or genocidal campaigns by the Myanmar military and the previous administrations. They are currently living under the poverty line with very little access to resources, and things like food and water is not enough in the camps, and people are actually genuinely worried where they're going to get food or the rations to feed their entire family. And what I've heard is that some families have not been able to feed their entire family for the past 2 years. It is not that the issues are dire. It's actually getting worse and worse as the international aid dwindles down. And we understand in this realm, in the humanitarian level, that yes, the aid will come, but then they will slowly dwindle away because of the nature of how international relations sometimes have very short attention span. And so the most important thing that people actually have been deprived of as well is the ability to contribute to their families, to their communities, and to the larger society. And this is what carves the idea of belonging. And at this point, Rohingya people in the camps are almost left in a limbo, going into how much people have resiliently pushed against the tide of militarization, securitization, and silencing of activists. A lot of my colleagues, sometimes when they were organizing protests, especially during not necessarily protests, but like rallies to commemorate, for example, the Genocide Commemoration Day on August 25th, some of them have actually been picked up by the security team or certain authority that just didn't want them to organize, just didn't want them to basically gather people together because of the fear of radicalization, which does not present itself in this scenario, but other scenarios where it's more shady. But in this case, some of my colleagues have actually, like last year, because they were completely prohibited from actually holding a rally, gathering people more than 7. So they actually strung up a bunch of masks on a field. And I think some of us might have seen the photo. And there is a picture of basically a poster that says no consultation, no solution. And I thought that was extremely powerful from them. So they're not only just prohibited from rallying, from educating people, from actually helping building this community up where it's been beaten down so much, but it's also the active attempt to actually silence them, to actually go on to not consult them on things that actually matter. And this is why it actually gets worse and worse for people. Like the case of Uncle Mohibullah, he's actually asked for help repeatedly, but no one would listen. And having been able to meet him in person, I remember that we have had to actually whisper while we spoke for 2 hours in his own home. Can you imagine having to whisper in your own home for 2 hours? Because you're facing threats that no outside organizations that supposedly have authority over the camps and are supposedly, to take care of you, even they don't want to take the case. Even they just didn't want to look at this issue more deeply. And the fact that some of the organizations that have ignored him prior to that have later on come out after his death saying, oh, we're so sorry, and we condemn this sort of violence. Did his life mean nothing? A lot of what he's done was actually getting us back up, and he was involved in a lot of international justice mechanism, and I fear that we don't have anyone to actually fill his shoes. So I think it's time for both the Bangladeshi Authority and the international community at large to take our safety more seriously, regardless of whether or not someone actually contributes in a level that they become more outspoken and put themselves at risk. But as a whole, Rohingya community deserves safety, deserves the basic protection that we have not been afforded by our own country in Myanmar. Are we going to repeat the cycle? Are we putting people in a cycle of genocide where it never actually ends and people continuously be traumatized? So I think the international responsibility is much, much beyond holding the Myanmar authorities accountable for what they've done, but actually rehabilitating victims and survivors.
Thank you. I know that this is not easy to talk about. These are very difficult things. So I really do appreciate that. And before we go to sort of the other side of this equation, to talk to Anwar about the resettlement experience and what that has been like here in the United States and in Milwaukee, to be specific, when we think about the mass numbers of people in Bangladesh in the camps, sometimes when we talk about resettlement, one of the questions we're asked is, well, there's so many vulnerable people. There's so many vulnerable people for whom staying in Bangladesh is not tenable and returning to their homes is not tenable. Resettlement just can't make big enough of a difference. How do you start to talk about that? And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what role resettlement could play in helping some of the activists who are now feeling a particularly chilling effect on their activism and their ability to speak out given recent events.
I want to preface this by, thanking you for actually asking that question. I think it's very important for people to understand that Brother Anwar, myself, would not have been here speaking to you if it weren't for the ability for us to be resettled and be able to actually amplify our own voices and be helped in this manner and actually get our messages out there. So there is that importance, number one. But the second thing is, my people are very resourceful, and even the most dire conditions, you will find them able to create things out of thin air almost. And it's very magical to witness, but at the same time, it's very, very, very painful. They have been able to, be creative in surviving, but also we would have to imagine that they would be able to do so much more if they were actually given resources, given the access to help that they actually need. And we both have that. I cannot say how thankful I am to be here today, to actually be able to stand on my own feet, not having to actually depend on anybody, and be able to create life for myself in Canada. And I'm pretty sure Brother Anwar feels the same. The thing is, it's not just the ability to move to a safer place, but it actually gives us a broader arena for us to work with, for us to amplify other people's voices as well, for us to do the heavy lifting of the things that maybe our counterparts on the ground in Myanmar or in Bangladesh and in any other countries that they're living in precarious conditions, and the entire region is like that. For us to be able to do that, it requires us to have that relative safety. It requires us to have a little bit of social mobility, the upward social mobility. And without that, it's increasingly difficult. On the ground, people cannot organize, cannot rally, cannot, group together for more than 5 or 6 people, and it becomes a really, really difficult issue to walk around, to run around. And I think more and more of the focus needs to be, on the people who have been extremely devastated by this recent waves of violence in 2017, especially women who've actually experienced sexual and gender-based violence, and men, of course. There are a lot of those same victims and survivors who've actually given accounts to the International Court of Justice and currently are working with the International Criminal Court. Some of them have worked in documentations, and the museum has interviewed a few of those people. Their chance of going back into Myanmar right now is not even zero. It's minus. It's not possible at all for them to even be kept safe in the Bangladeshi, refugee camps. How are we imagining that they would be able to return, even if the situations get better? Their ability to face the people, the perpetrators, because we're not talking about perpetrator 1 or 2, criminals. We're actually talking about an entire, division of an army. Absolutely, there's no way, unless there's a domestic judicial process that goes on and these people are actually prosecuted for their crimes, the international justice mechanism will not be able to capture all of them, to actually, encompass all of these people, and to make that, to make these women, or to make the victims of crimes against humanity or genocide go back to face their perpetrators is just such a vast injustice. And understanding that, I think it's increasingly important for us to actually push beyond the narratives that, the refugees are going to be there for a while, we can't do anything, and we can't really get a lot of numbers of refugees to be resettled. Well, it has to be an international effort. I'm sorry. The international community it's going to have to actually organize something and figure it out for once. It is not the responsibility of the victims to actually figure this out for everybody. It's increasingly going to be the US's responsibility and its allies like Canada, Netherlands, and the European unions and other countries that it can actually rally around to get people resettled, especially the victims of genocide, especially activists who would definitely be able to use a lot more help to amplify their voices, and the people who are actually in a very, very vulnerable situation who may be able to get help, like people from the community that are disabled. A lot of things that are in the camps right now are disabling them even more so, and they have a higher chance of actually have social mobility or moving upward and contributing to the society if they're here or in a country that can provide them services. So I will leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Yasmin, you never need to apologize for being passionate about the need for the international community to step up and help with the resettlement. That is something that we all share. We all share that. Anwar, we want to talk to you now a little bit about the resettlement experience. As somebody who has gone through it, you know this intimately, and that it is how you and your family ended up in Milwaukee. A little bit about what this has been like for you, for your family, and others in the community. So I guess, the first question I have for you is, what do you hear either from your own family and yourself, but also from fellow Rohingya community members about their resettlement experiences in the US or to other resettlement countries? What has this opportunity meant for them? And then the 2 follow-up questions, I'll just ask you all of this at once, and you can take this how you feel. Resettlement is not a magic wand. It doesn't make everything perfect, at the snap of fingers. It is a very challenging process. So if you could talk a little bit about what some of those challenges either you've experienced or community members of, but also some success stories. There are always going to be challenges, but there are always going to be successes too. So if you could talk a little bit about all of that. I know it is a lot, but we want to be able to give our listeners a good picture of what resettlement really looks like for this community?
Thank you, Naomi. I'll try to answer as best as I can. Well, refugee life is a very, very hard, I know it because I went through it. I was in Malaysia for around 10 to 13 years. So it's very hard. Daily life is without any opportunity, any kinds of opportunity. You cannot find work, make money to support yourself, your family, and plan for the future. And health and mental health, also well-being, are always concerned, as access to medicines and care is very limited, and as quality conditions of the refugee camps make sanitizations and hygienes, difficult to maintain. And education for our kids, for my children's, when we are in Malaysia, it's children development. It's very challenging in the refugee, environment. There are a few schools, those, that operate only teach very basics to the youngest kids, And also we see the family separations, is a huge challenge. Some families get split up, some living apart for years without knowing if they will ever be united. I have seen those families here, in Milwaukee. I have seen kids without both parents, going through a terrible situations where wife or husband resettled, but their spouse was not, and they were waiting in limbo to be together. To this point, we would like to see the resettlement increase as we get past this pandemic. There are backlogs of resettlement cases, for reunification, for citizenship as well. We hope that this existing application can get processed. And about the Rohingya, how they are doing here in Milwaukee. So more Rohingya being resettled in the US than any other high-income country. That is a great place to start. We would love to see more Rohingya resettled and backlogs of existing applications cleared. That would be really, really helpful to my people. Rohingya in Milwaukee have established, strong and active community. Milwaukee offers, a lot for newly arrived refugees. There are ample jobs opportunities. There are low cost of living, eager students at diverse schools, and excellent social services. And we have a lot of nonprofits here that are very helpful through the process as well. We are able to buy a building and launch a center. So for us, that is what we are grateful for and working very hard towards it. So we have also a lot of barriers, here. The barriers Rohingya face when trying to access services are language, literacy, technology, health, and education. I suppose, I could talk about these challenges for a long time. It is what I deal, it is what we deal with on a daily basis as we serve my people with their needs. I just said that there is never any shortage of challenges, but we would choose to focus on creative solutions to the challenges, increasing their access to service and information as well. So Rohingya, we have some success stories here. Rohingya in the USA are strong. They have opportunities that other Rohingya around the world do not have. Rohingya back in Bangladesh and Myanmar rely on us for the financial support, and we need to come together here to realize, our potentials to become leaders in our own rights and support Rohingya where they are. Here in Milwaukee, families are safer, so the sense of fear is leaving after some time. Resettled refugees are in a much better position than their families elsewhere. So for those, that have made it here, they are beginning to explore these new opportunities. We can see the evidence of these successes financially, number one, and we are able to find the good jobs and have the ability to save and send money back home. A lot of families are able to buy home within a few years. So here, in Milwaukee, home ownership rates are growing very rapidly. We are beginning to see Rohingya and Burmese businesses open up, which is really great to see. Another success, kids are doing well in the school. And adult programs also, there are a lot of other good adult programs like SIX as well. So, and seeing other Rohingya organizations grow around the country, which is also another good thing. For us, for our organizations, our biggest success is that we were able to buy our building and launch our new community center, which is currently the largest Rohingya-owned building in the country and place where we will offer important services both socially and religiously for our community. I think that when given a chance, we are able to achieve a lot. We see our kids doing well in a school. As time goes on, we are getting more and more families here in Milwaukee and in the United States. We are beginning to see our potential and reach it in some ways. It's exciting to see all the great things happening around here. And in terms of our development and progress, it's a kind of success that my people have had to live without for so long.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the start of the community center. That's an incredible achievement. And I look forward to staying in touch with you and seeing all the great work that you're all doing in Milwaukee. That is really exciting. Before we open up to the audience Q&A, Kira, I want to end with you because, we've heard a little bit today about why resettlement out of Bangladesh. And I should note that resettlement of Rohingya has happened to the United States. Obviously, we see Anwar here and, to Canada as well, but it has not been from Bangladesh. That's an important note. Certainly not in any great numbers from Malaysia and from other countries in the region. So I do just want to make that a little bit of note. But given what the things we've talked about, the decreasing likelihood of return to Myanmar, the significant obstacles for safety and integration in Bangladesh, given all of that and your work with the museum, which does, as you noted, focus on with the Simon Scott Center, focuses on the prevention of genocides. But when the reality is when genocides do occur, like what happened in Burma, there is a responsibility for the global community to ensure that those who survived these mass atrocities are able to find lasting safety. So if it cannot be back in Myanmar in this case, or in the countries to which they fled, what role should resettlement play in responding to genocide? Is there a role for it? When you look at big picture issues related to contemporary genocide, how does resettlement fit into the response mechanisms, or should it?
Thanks, Naomi. That's a really important question. So I think it's important to remember when we ask this question is that when we've gotten to the point of having a conversation about resettlement, we've already failed on the prevention front. So we've failed in our international obligation to prevent genocide, to prevent mass atrocities. And there are many tools available to the US government and to others to fulfill this obligation to prevent mass atrocities. So I really hope that one day we live in a world where we don't even have to have this conversation and where people can live in safety, security, and dignity in their homes. That being said, there are also many tools available to respond to mass atrocities once they do occur. And the protection of survivors through refugee resettlement is absolutely one of the key tools that countries should use to respond to genocide. Rohingya and other survivors of genocide have lived through the worst crimes known to humankind, and they deserve protection, they deserve safety. Yet, as we have seen through this conversation, the conditions in the Rohingya camps are appalling, and Rohingya in Burma face an ongoing risk of genocide, meaning that those who've been displaced cannot return home anytime soon. So while the important thing to remember here is that the ultimate goal of the international community's response to the Rohingya genocide should be to create conditions that allow for Rohingya to return to their homes with safety, dignity, and their human rights. In the meantime, refugee resettlement allows members of particularly vulnerable groups the opportunity to find lasting safety. So resettlement is essential to allow Rohingya survivors of genocide to live lives of dignity and safety, free from persecution because of who they are. And it's our opinion that the US should be a global leader on this, and that other countries should work together to welcome as many Rohingya as possible. We also can't forget how we got to this point, a failure of the international community to prevent mass atrocities. And so it's also important to remember in the big picture of prevention and response that countries should be coordinating to mitigate and effectively respond to atrocity risks in the future for the Rohingya and also for other groups in Burma and around the world who face persecution because of who they are.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kira. We don't have a lot of questions coming in, but we have a few. And so I'll go ahead and pick a few, and we'll see what kind of progress we can make here with this. And I'm also, I think, going to take moderator's prerogative and maybe answer one of these questions myself, which is, with the massive resettlement effort that's underway in the US in response to what has recently happened in Afghanistan, is it actually realistic to advocate for resettling other groups right now? As much as we want to welcome refugees from other parts of the world, does the US actually have the capacity to do so? I love this question because it's an important one. We need to have an honest conversation about resettlement. And the answer is yes, the US does have capacity, but I am not naive or immune to the fact that the resettlement network around the country is facing challenges that have not been seen for a very long time. And that's for a few reasons. One of which is that we are rebuilding. I don't need to go into details. The last 4 years were not particularly friendly to US refugee resettlement. And as a result, the local domestic resettlement infrastructure was hanging on by a thread when the Biden administration took office. So what we are trying to do now is rebuild at the same time that we are welcoming the highest number of refugees in a condensed period of time that we've seen probably since the wars in Southeast Asia ended. So these are real challenges. But as I said at the start, our resettlement program was never designed to be a one population at a time program. As the resettlement program rebuilds in this country and there is more and more capacity, we absolutely can resettle refugees from all parts of the world. And that's what our local resettlement network is doing right now. We are balancing welcoming Afghans into our communities, which is an incredibly important initiative, with welcoming refugees from other parts of the world. People are figuring out how to balance that capacity. And what we have seen at HIAS, which is in no way a surprise, but is always incredibly heartwarming to see, we have seen an outpouring of support about how can we help? How can we not only welcome Afghans, but other refugees as well? And so we as a community are standing at the ready. We know other faith communities are as well, and other secular communities too. So the amount of community support that we see every single day should not be discounted. So all of that to say, there is the capacity, there will be more capacity, and having as many conversations like this as possible, I think, to remind all of us about global resettlement needs is really important. I'm just going to check to see if there are any other questions because I want to, oh, good. Okay, I like this next one. Would contacting our political representatives and requesting help for the Rohingya be of any benefit? I'm going to actually ask, I know Yasmin, you are in Canada, so it's a little bit of a different, but advocacy works or matters wherever we are. So Yasmin, I want you to take a crack at this first, and then Anwar too, to talk about what advocacy from your perspective should and could look like. Yasmin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I know that a lot of my community here have actually collectively and at times, individually in each of our own respective area, because like the US, Canada is quite vast and we're not concentrated in one area. A lot of the community, for example, in Kitchener have their own effort. And even though, during this last 4 year, the resettlement out of Bangladesh has not been possible, people were being resettled from Malaysia and some other countries nearby. And the community has set up it's sort of like a structure, not really, but within the communities, who to go to for each of the things that you might need. And they've sort of formed that sense of communal help for people who come and need to resettle. I know that the Rohingya Association Canada has done really amazing work in that specific area, and a lot more is underway, but definitely contacting representatives and making sure the pressure is kept on the elected representatives and whoever works with the government, the opposition, the other parties. It doesn't really matter. Just if we can get as many people involved in this as possible, the pressure will be built, and more people will feel the need to actually continuously look over this subject over and over again. And I think repetition will make it perfect, because a lot of times when we contact elected representatives about resettlement, it often becomes a back burner kind of issue. Whereas, of course, there are other, very, very pressing issues about Rohingya, and it's just a lot of things just kind of get mingled, and there is no central focus. And I think a very, very real effort that the Canada and the US and other, international communities and basically nation states that have the capacity can do is actually resettle people, and just get people from the suggestion of the communities to be resettled. That's also a possibility. And so contacting your representatives is definitely a way to go.
That's the answer. I'm a little biased as somebody who does advocacy work, but I love that answer. Anwar, what about you? Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to add a few things. So during the pandemic, also, we see some families, resettle here from Malaysia, and from other countries as well. But as Sister Yasmin says, contacting with their representatives, local representatives. I think that's how if next year our administrations, I heard that they increase their numbers, so if that is true, then we will see more, more Rohingyas would resettle, here,
Thank you. And I will just add, I love what you said, both of you, but this idea of repetition, letting your elected officials know, specifically here in the US context, that this is an important issue for you, and that you support resettlement writ large, but and mentioning the Rohingya, let them know. And even if you think, oh, they already support this idea, I've heard them speak about it before, then let them know that you appreciate it. Say thank you. If they disagree with you, keep on working and chipping away. And please do consider HIAS to be a resource for you. If you have specific questions about how to do advocacy on this, you should reach out at any time, because we want to be able to have as many voices doing this as possible. Now, with that said, as we're closing, I want to do so by first thanking the speakers here today. I am so honored to have done this with you, and I look forward to future conversations. And I want to tell you how you can take action. So you can, for those of you who are not familiar with the HIAS website, I encourage you to check out our creatively named Take Action page, which is, you can just go to hias.org. And I believe this is going to be put in the chat for you to see. And there's a whole page about how to get involved, how to take action. I also, Kira, I know we didn't plan this. I want to toss to you also to let people know about the exhibit that's still ongoing at the museum, so that they can check that out. And then the last bit is, before I hand it off to Kira, is to keep in touch with us. If you have questions about how to do this advocacy, to let us know. So Kira, any quick plug about what people can see both online and in person at the museum?
Yeah, thanks, Naomi. I think this will work for me to just drop a link. Oh, looks like we've already got it, a link to our online exhibition in the chat. So as I mentioned, the museum has an exhibition called Burma's Path to Genocide, both in person in Washington, DC. So if you go to usham.org right now, you can find out how to visit the museum in person in Washington, D.C. and see this exhibit. If you're not able to do that, you're also able to visit it online. It's a very powerful exhibition that has been informed by years of consultations with members of the Rohingya community, and it really makes the case for both prevention, so that the community doesn't have to experience these atrocities again, and also for the protection of communities and survivors of genocide and violence. So I would really encourage you to check it out, and thanks, Naomi, for flagging that.
Of course. So we're going to end it here. Another thank you to Kira, to Yasmin, and to Anwar. And we will continue to have this conversation. This is not the last time we'll do this. So thank you, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.